the scientific proof of spiritual contact and how that awareness will change your life. And I want to explain to people how this happens. Alpha theta border is right around 8 hertz. 8 hertz is where psychic and mediumistic activity occur. That's why when people are sleeping and they have a dream or a deceased loved one, they encounter them and you come out of it and it's like, that wasn't a regular dream. I really had a conversation. Guess what? Spirits can tell when you're at that vibration, that frequency, and they adjust their frequency to align with yours.
I'd like to welcome to the show, Mark Anthony. How you doing, Mark?
I'm doing great, Alex. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much for coming on the show, my friend. I'm excited to talk to you, man, because I've had psychic mediums on the show before. I've had channels on before. I've had spiritual gurus on before, but I've never had a psychic lawyer. It's not something that you see very often. Those are two very different fields.
Yes, they are.
Very different fields. So I'm dying to find out how this person who's in front of me has actually come to be. So before we start the conversation, what was your life like before this psychic medium insanity came into your life and threw it upside down, or was it always part of your life?
Yeah, I think we need to reverse the question. Say, what was my life like before the legal insanity came into it? And the reason that I say that, Alex, is that psychics and mediums, it's an ability that runs on both sides of my family, both my mother's and father's side, for generations.
Mhm.
And I was about 3.5 years old when I started seeing spirits. And which is not unusual for a toddler to be talking to invisible friends, but when
Mhm.
mommy and daddy can see who I'm talking to. And my dad had been a U.S. Navy SEAL, and he was an aerospace engineer. My mother was a commercial illustrator. Talk about a no nonsense family. And I remember mom saying, "Oh, he's got it," and dad saying, "Oh, geez, he's got it." And so the reactions were quite different. And the thing is, I've tracked the history of psychic mediumship on in my family back to the 1890s on both sides. My
Wow.
father's side of the family, they were very waspy, Pennsylvania Baptists. And my dad had 4 siblings, 3 sisters, and a brother. And one of his sisters, Marjorie, was a medium, as was his mother, Isabel, and their maternal grandmother, Grace. And then on my mother's side of the family, that family hailed from Italy, and my mother's father was born in Italy. Her maternal great grandmother, Giovanna, came over to Italy around 1900, and she was known in the Italian community of New York City and North Jersey, Tony Soprano's stomping grounds,
Mhm.
as the woman who knows things. In fact, officials from the Catholic Church used to come and meet with her and talk to her. And in 2016, PBS did a special called The Italian Americans, and it was a 4 hour, 2 hours, 2 night specials. They actually did an entire segment on Giovanna and referenced her psychic abilities. So it was really cool seeing that. I remember when it was on, every commercial break, my cousins were calling me, I'm calling them, and my older brother and sister, we were all very excited to see how Giovanna was receiving once again the respect that she so well deserved. And so I grew up in a family of people who were capable of anticipating future events and seeing spirits. I was drawn to the clergy, which is not unusual for a medium. I know that you've had several psychics on, and we are drawn to the spiritual, but I felt that going into the clergy was going to have too many rules and regulations. So I ended up in law.
That's all to
Yeah, I
say.
mean, talk about jumping out of the rule and regulation fire frying pan right into the regulatory fire. But I appreciated law, because certainly you help people. But what I liked about it is I've always been a natural speaker, and it gave me a chance to use that. I also liked the way, because I was a prosecutor, then I was a criminal defense attorney, then a complex civil litigation, a personal injury trial lawyer. and it puts you in everything. It's kind of like I don't know if you ever saw a movie, The Devil's Advocate, with
Of
Al
course,
Pacino and
of
Keanu
course.
Reeves. And Keanu Reeves at the end, why the law? And Pacino, because it puts you in everything.
Anything, exactly.
And it's funny on one hand, but if you look at it on the other, there is no aspect of our lives that doesn't have some form of legal regulation,
Of
which
course.
really is a good thing. I mean, if you're drinking water that is safe, it's because of regulations. Eating food that is safe, electrical wiring has regulations so your house doesn't burn down. And then, of course, there's also the, intrusive nature of regulations. But the thing is, throughout the course of my legal career, I had to work with forensics, with physicists, with neuroscientists, with biologists, with chemists. It put me in so many different disciplines, coupled with my natural curiosity for history, archaeology, philosophy, theology, and near-death experience research, so that it gave me this solid background that when I left the practice of law to go into this full time, I started using my work because I specialized in head injury litigation. So I had a background in how the brain works, or what we know of it, and I started to see parallels as to, oh, this is what makes spirit communication possible. So it's been a rather interesting, long and twisting road. But I also realize that all of these factors have come together to help me in the work that I'm doing now.
Let me ask you this because I've heard that it comes in line of my mom's side or my dad's side, long term. I mean, I have it in my family. I've had it. My grandmother had it. My aunts had it on her side. My grandfather didn't know what my grandmother did, but every time he had a business decision, he's like, "Let me throw it by grandma," and grandma would say, "Nope, he's not a good guy." Yes, so that it's always been around, especially in my
Yeah.
culture. The Latino culture is very,
Yeah.
very into this world. Is there a DNA aspect to this? Is there a something that comes with the DNA or the essence, I guess, was I can't use the proper legal, not the legal term, the scientific term, genetics, if you will, genetics that
Yes.
come in. Is there something like that? Is there the psychic gene, if you will?
I believe that there is, because look at other things. There's a reason that you look like your parents. That's
Right.
because of genetics. Certain traits run in certain families. For example, in my family, brown hair, brown eyes runs in the family, but every couple generations, somebody with blonde hair and blue eyes pops up. And that's what's known as a recessive genetic trait. A recessive means that it may skip a generation or two. For example, did you choose to be right-handed or left-handed? No, most people are right-handed, 90% of the people in the world, but left-handedness is also a genetic trait. So when you get two parents with the same recessive genetic trait, then the likelihood of one of their children possessing that trait increases exponentially. And in my family's case, that would be me. Both my older brother and older sister, they're extremely intuitive, but they're not mediums. My mother was the full package, psychic medium, and I'm the most like her. My dad definitely had the mediumship ability. He had an uncanny ability to see auras, which sometimes was a good thing, sometimes not, because he could see somebody and tell if they were going to die soon, because he would see this dark line around him. And certainly when he was going into combat, he said it was very, very upsetting when he'd see a number of his friends with it and then they'd be killed in the engagement. So, I, with all due respect to my dad, I'm glad I didn't inherit that ability, because I remember I'd be out with him when he was older. He's passed on, and he'd look at somebody and he'd look away, and I knew. I said, "Are you seeing it?" He goes, "Yeah." He said that lady over there.
Well, that's a good question. How do you deal with this psychologically? Because yeah, you were born with it, so obviously, and you
It's always
actually
been
had
there. Yeah.
it's always been there. You've also had a lot of support in your
Yes.
family, as opposed to a lot of other psychic mediums who or channelers who don't have any of support or have parents who say this is crazy or try to stomp it down or stomp it out of their children. But I got to believe that once you figured out that this is special, that you weren't, everyone wasn't like you. On a
Right.
psychological standpoint, even as growing up as a kid, because we all just want to belong, you pretty much were standing. You were pretty much standing out of the crowd, even in middle school and high school, where you just want to be part of the group. How did you deal
Yeah,
with it?
there was a big part of my life, Alex, particularly when I was a teenager. I just wanted to be one of the guys,
Right,
but from day one, I was always different. I mean, everybody in the neighborhood knew that my family was different. And I always like to joke, we were kind of like like I said, dad was a NASA aerospace engineer. Mom was an artist. I had a super athletic brother, a very talented dancing and singing sister, and I was gifted with. I was always in the like top 2% of all my classes. But on top of that, I would see dead people and that. So it's
right.
hard not being a kid, but when you're a weird kid, and the thing is, my family was the weird family. We're kind of like the cool version of the Addams family.
Right.
But the thing is, I always had a lot of friends. I was always, but I never fit into any one group, but all the groups seemed to like me.
Hmm.
I hung out with all the surfers. I knew all the kind of the rednecks. I had a bunch
The
of black
geeks.
friends. I had the
Yeah.
Latino friends, and
Yeah.
I just sort of moved through all the groups, and everybody's like, "Oh, that's just Mark." So I'm very thankful for that. And that also served me very well as an attorney, people finding me approachable and opening up to me, and certainly as a medium as well. But as far as fitting in, I like to turn to the wisdom of Dr. Seuss. He said, why stand in when you were
When you can.
born, or why blend in when you were born to stand out?
Hmm.
And I think that for people that have any type of ability or talent, embrace that talent, embrace that ability. Now, obviously, when I was a little kid, my dad didn't want me because I went to Catholic school, and I remember him saying
Hmm.
to me, I was 5 years old and I was starting first grade, don't you tell anybody about this. He goes, you can talk about it to your mother and me all you want, but they won't understand. So I get into Catholic school, Alex, and they're teaching us about angels and saints and
Sure.
Jesus, Mary, and all these invisible entities. And I'm thinking this is cool. And then I started listening to the other things they were saying,
Yeah.
and I realized Dad was right. It's best if I kept this quiet, because there's this thought among a lot of religious people, and I'm a big proponent of religion as long as people actually follow the teachings and not use it as a moral justification for anger, bigotry, hatred, and violence. And that's where
Hmm.
religion goes wrong, because all the religions tell you to treat other people with respect. They all teach peace. All
Hmm.
the religions have the golden rule: treat people the way you want to be treated. They all have that, every single one. Um, but I realized pretty soon that it's best if I kept these abilities to myself.
So I always ask this to psychic mediums, because your dad, you kind of just said this with your dad, that he could always see this line around people that were about to die.
Yeah.
For you, is there a close sign? Is there like, hey, I'm not open for business right now, so ghosts, or not ghosts, but spirits that come in, please, I'm not open for business right now. Or is it like you're in the shower and a head pops in, hey man, can you talk to
Well, that has happened. That does happen, but I've learned to you have to let the spirits know I'm either doing this or I'm not. And you also have to realize that I'm in charge, or anybody that sees spirits, you're in charge, not the spirits. And once you establish those parameters, they'll respect your privacy. You don't leave the doors and windows of your house open and unlocked 24/7. So why should you do that to your brain, to your psyche? And I meet a lot of mediums, and the inexperienced ones will say, "Oh, I see spirits all the time. They're around me all the time." And it's like, well, do you really want that? It denigrates the quality of the contact if you're constantly bombarded, as opposed to I'm doing this now. I mean, when I'm doing readings for people, that's what I'm doing. And every bit of my brain power is focused on that. But there's times where, I got to go to the store, I got to get my car fixed, I got to work on stuff around the house, and I don't need, this constant bombardment. But I will tell you a funny story. I was scheduled to do a video conference with this woman in India. She wanted a reading, and that morning I was taking a shower. You said the shower, and I kept getting this image of this dark complected guy clutching his heart, going like this. Okay, and I'm like, okay, sir, taking shower here. Leave me alone. All right. So a couple hours later, I tune in, and there she is, and she's a very pleasant woman. And all of a sudden, this man comes through, and I start describing him. And she goes, "Oh, that's my father. He died of a heart attack." And I go, "I know. I met him in the shower this morning." And she goes, "What? What are you saying about my father?" I go, "No, no, no." I mean, it was really funny. And then she started laughing, and she goes, "Well, that is like my father. He was very pushy and invasive, and if he wanted to get your attention, nothing would stop him." And it was hilarious because when it came out of my mouth, I met him in the shower this morning. I mean, it was just one of those. It was one of those things that is like, hold on, I need to explain here, and I'm glad too that you brought up about the shower. A lot of people say that for some reason, when they're in the shower or the bathroom, that's when they tend to feel the presence of spirits.
Mm.
Well, in my work, I've developed several theories about spirit communication, one of which is the electromagnetic soul, which is what our soul really is, which is pure consciousness, a soul is spirit, the who and what we are. And it is pure electromagnetic energy, eternal electromagnetic energy. And the reason people are under the impression that they see spirits a lot in the bathroom is because of the conductivity of a bathroom. Hard surfaces, lots of metal, water. It's easier to pick up on the frequency and the vibration there. That doesn't mean that they're not, with you in other places. And also, a lot of times when people are in the bathroom, you're focused on other things. You're taking a shower, you're a bit relaxed, it's private. So you don't have the typical distractions. Plus, you're in a hyperconductive environment, which makes it more conducive to the electromagnetic connection with the spirit.
Now, when you went into law, which is fascinating to me, you knew you were already a psychic medium when you were going into law.
Yeah.
Um, when you finally started to practice law, I feel it's like you're cheating a little bit because you're a psychic medium. So you have a little inside information on stuff that you can't disclose to the prosecution. Because what are you going to say? Listen, I was in the shower and this guy showed up and he told me that your client did this or that. How did you deal with I'm assuming that happened at one point or another. You had information come in about a case or something like that. How did you deal with it ethically?
Well, first off, everybody has some form of an advantage. So let's say that in personal injury, here I am in a small firm and I'm up against an insurance company's lawyers and they have
Oh, yeah.
millions of dollars and a whole team of lawyers. Talk about an unfair advantage.
Sure.
Okay. Talk about when I'm representing somebody as a criminal defense attorney and I'm up against, the state of Florida with all their wealth and power and investigators. But people also need to realize that psychic ability, mediumistic ability, doesn't make us all knowing, all seeing, and
Sure.
omnipresent. It can give us insights. For example, I've consulted on a number of investigations with police, and obviously, intuitive information, psychic information, mediumistic information is not admissible in a court of law.
Yeah.
It's the ultimate hearsay. Hearsay is an out of court statement offered to prove the truth of the matter asserted.
Mhm.
And to get around hearsay, the person who made that statement or the statement itself or the material must be subjected to cross examination. So it's not like we can get your Aunt Martha to come through and we put her on the witness stand. So, spirit of Aunt Martha, you would have us believe that. But this type of information can be given to the police to put them on the trail to
Mhm.
locate evidence, which then is admissible in evidence. So that's why psychics and mediums are used by far more than the general public is aware. It's kind of a behind the scenes type of thing.
Hmm.
And when I was a prosecutor, when you're a young prosecutor, they stick you with first appearance, usually on weekends. And first appearance is when people get arrested, they have to be brought before a judge
Right.
within 24 hours if they're being held, so the judge can determine if there should be bond, a bail, or if they should be released. And so I'd be there with my co-counsel, another prosecutor, and then the other table, usually the public defenders were there and people that had private attorneys, they'd come in and we'd have a stack of police reports. And I'd say that one's sexual offense. That one's a drug dealer. That one's this before I ever looked at the reports. And my co-counsels would be going, how do you know that? Because people that have been in the drunk tank all night all have a grungy, worn out look. Okay. And it was because it was the vibration, it was the what they were exuding. So it kind of got to be a game to when we do first appearances to see if Mark can guess what they're charged with before we show him the arrest report. And so then it started getting around the legal profession that this guy's kind of weird, but he sort of knows things. And where I found it particularly useful, my ability, was during jury selection.
Oh yeah.
Jury selection is before the trial starts. And the judge makes, you bring in what we call the venire. Those are the potential jurors. So
Mhm.
let's say you bring in 30 people, and depending on the case, most juries are six people with one alternate. In major felonies, in certain civil cases, it's 12 jurors with two alternates. And I had a case where I was defending. And so the prosecutor got finished asking the prospective jury questions. But during the whole time, I kept getting drawn to this one woman. I'll never forget her. She was an attractive Latino woman. She had this beautiful olive complexion, big dark eyes. But I felt a female spirit with her, and I kept feeling this tightening around my throat. And I was like, okay, and I'm like, this is not the time, for this. But there was a female around her, and I kept feeling like this blockage, inability to breathe. So the judge says, all right, defense counsel, you may inquire. So I stand up at the podium and I'm going through my questions, and a standard question is, because I was representing this guy who was a big bruiser, and he got into it. It was a barroom brawl. My client beat the daylights out of another big bruiser. So the loser of the fight filed charges. That's not an unusual thing. All right. So it was like big bruiser A and big bruiser B, but it was still a crime of violence. So I asked, have any of you or has anyone in your family ever been the victim of a violent crime? Well, lo and behold, Alex, this woman starts shaking and she raises her hand, and tears start coming down her cheeks. And she said, a year ago, my sister was in a foreign country when an escaped mental patient strangled her,
Mhm.
dismembered her body, and threw her in a garbage pile like she was trash. So
Jesus.
I'm standing there like, they didn't teach me how to deal with this in law school. And even the
Mhm.
prosecutor was like a really annoying person, couldn't think of anything to say or object. And my client, I can hear him go like, dude, what are you doing? And this woman, her sister, now I'm able to see her. And literally, Alex, I had a foot in each world.
Wow.
And if your listeners want to find out what happens, they have to get my first book, Never Let Go.
I assume she wasn't a juror. Uh, that I could assume so much that she wasn't a juror on
It,
that
it
on
was
that case.
really what happened though was really quite positive what happened there. So,
Okay, good,
but
good, good.
it's one of the stories that I write about in Never Letting Go. That's my first book. Never Letting Go is a guide on the journey through grief. It helps you when you're in that fog, like, oh my God,
Mhm.
I can't believe it happened. And then when I was on the Never Letting Go tour, Alex, people started asking me really deep questions. Is there a hell? Is there a heaven? What happens with people who commit suicide? Do animals have souls? And so I started compiling those questions, and I'm always doing research. And so that was the genesis for my book, Evidence of Eternity, which was my second book. And Evidence of Eternity, I was blown away when I was notified by Columbia University that it was up for a Pulitzer Prize. And then my last book, The Afterlife Frequency, um, I went more in depth into the science. The subtitle of The Afterlife Frequency is The Scientific Proof of Spiritual Contact and How That Awareness Will Change Your Life. And I want to explain to people how this happens. And I also want people to understand that it is not going to be, none of my books are like reading an algebra textbook. I
Mhm.
suffered through enough boring books in the
Oh,
practice of law. I am not going to inflict that on everyone. All of my books, yes, I explain the concepts, but then I illustrate them with fast moving stories, all real true stories, to help bring that concept to life for you.
so let's talk about that for a minute because there hasn't I've never been able to come across anyone who's got scientific or came across approached this scientifically, um, especially psychic mediumship. This is something that's really interesting, and I think we said that you said this to me earlier before we got started, is that you're trying to bring the psychic mediums out of the sideshow carnival
Yeah.
vibe, the gypsy vibe, the that image that we all have of psychic mediums with the crystal ball and here the
And the
lottery
turban
ticket.
and all
Yeah,
that.
yeah, all that kind of stuff, which has been popularized through movies and televisions and in books for
Right.
centuries. But this concept of psychic mediums have been around for thousands of years.
Yes.
There's a reason why it is still being talked about. It is not just a myth. There's so much evidential proof for these things, whether you believe it or don't believe it. Anyone who's had a real psychic reading with a real psychic who really knows what they're doing and says, Grandma did this, Grandpa did this, don't go around that corner tomorrow. Certain things like that can really feel like, oh God, there's something else out there. Now you could be afraid of it, which I'm sure you've come across a lot in your profession. People who
Yeah.
just freak the hell out about it.
Yeah.
Um, so
Well,
let's go down a little bit with the scientific aspects. Can you break down some of those concepts and ideas for people, how you can prove scientifically that this
yes.
exists?
Let me start with my electromagnetic soul theory. We know from quantum physics that everything is made of molecules. Okay, we all learned that in grade school science. Molecules, in turn, are composed of atoms. Atoms are made up of electrons, protons, and neutrons. Yet those are made of a smaller particle known as a quantum, which is pure electromagnetic energy. Now, for our science friends, an electron is technically a quantum because it is 1/1800th the size of a proton. All right.
Mhm.
So I want to make sure because there's always some picky science person saying, oh, electrons are quantum. What that means, Alex, is that everything on the subatomic level is composed of the same particle or same type of electromagnetic energy. That means you and me, our bodies. That means the headset that you're wearing, the radio waves that this show is being broadcast on, the light of the sun that we see, the surface of Mars and beyond. Everything is made of electromagnetic energy which vibrates at different frequencies. That's why this pen is made of the same electromagnetic energy that I am, although I vibrate at a different frequency, ergo, because we're alive. We know from the first law of thermodynamics and physics that energy is neither created nor destroyed, only transferred from one form to another. We know from the field of neuroscience that the brain, the whole body has an electrical field, but the brain, which is barely 2% of the body's weight, uses over 20% of its electrical activity. The heart uses the most, and we want it to because it's a pump, okay? It's a pump, and that sucker needs to be pumping all day long and healthfully. Now, we know that every great spiritual teacher from ancient India through Zoroaster, Moses, Buddha, Jesus, Confucius, Lao Tzu, Muhammad, Gandhi, Mother Teresa, St. Francis of Assisi, the Native American spiritualists, the religions of Africa have all taught that the who and what we are, the soul, the consciousness, pre-exists the body, comes into the body, moves on after the body dies. So I developed the electromagnetic soul, the term to describe what we really are, which is a soul, a spirit, a consciousness that is pure electromagnetic energy that is eternal. Now, the brain, and I work a lot with consciousness scientists and afterlife researchers. If you look at a neuroscience book, there'll be hundreds and hundreds of pages on the functions of the brain, but maybe a paragraph on consciousness. To
Right.
date, neuroscientists are completely unable to describe consciousness. That's because the brain didn't create consciousness, it merely hosts it. For example, your computer hard drive, did it create the Windows program? Of course not. It merely hosts the programs that are on it. And when your hard drive slash brain crashes, the information doesn't disintegrate, it is uploaded. So when we die, our EMS, electromagnetic soul, leaves the body and then goes to a higher frequency, what I call the afterlife frequency, also called the other side. Some people call it heaven. Okay. So now that we understand that our brain is a coherent quantum field that survives physical death, this is bolstered by over 50 years of near-death experience research, where
Mhm.
people die and then they feel themselves leave their body. They usually describe going through a tunnel into a light, meeting deceased loved ones, and there's phases to a near-death experience. Sometimes they just feel the floating before they're revived. Other times they get right up to where they encounter the divine power that we call God. And it's always I mean, the divine power is always described in terms of light. Interestingly enough, every single belief system refers to the divine power, the God, as light. So then we also have studies in the last couple years I always can remember this because it happened on 2/22/22, February 2nd, February 22nd of 2022 in Tartu, Estonia. An 87-year-old man started having epileptic seizures. At the emergency room, he was being monitored with an EEG, which is standard protocol for epilepsy, and then suddenly had a massive heart attack and died. The doctors were astounded by what they found. We have 5 different brainwave frequencies: gamma, beta, alpha, theta, delta. Gamma, that's like when you're on Final Jeopardy and your brain's cranking at flux, you're doing a calculus exam. Beta, activities of daily living, the state we're in right now. Alpha, I call alpha groovy baby, because that's when you start to relax. It's when you meditate. It's when you're drifting off to sleep. Then the theta, theta is deep sleep. That's where you dream. And then delta, very little brainwave activity when you're sleeping, but that's where your body heals, cellular regeneration. There are different hertz for the brainwave frequencies, and the alpha theta border is right around 8 hertz. 8 hertz is where psychic and mediumistic activity occur. That's why when people are sleeping and they have a dream or a deceased loved one, they encounter them and you come out of it and it's like, "No, that wasn't a regular dream. I really had a conversation." Guess what? Spirits can tell when you're at that vibration, that frequency, and they adjust their frequency to align with yours. That's why the Bible's loaded with prophetic stories of prophetic dreams. Okay, you have all these dreams in the Bible. Every religion does. So my electromagnetic soul theory, okay, they're a pure quantum field. They're coherent. I mean, that's who we are. It's just minus a body, is able to identify that frequency and align with it. So we have the near-death experience research. All right, so back to Tartu, Estonia on 2/22/22. All 5 brainwave frequencies of this man went off the charts at the time of death. The doctors didn't understand this. They figured things would just sort of go down and fizzle out. Instead, there was a huge surge of activity. It was been studied by scientists all over the world, and they said it appears to be consistent with what people say is a near-death experience. Then, by the end of 2022, the lucid dying study. It was conducted with over 500 people at 20, I think 24 different hospitals in both the U.S. and U.K. People who were in cardiac arrest and being given CPR were administered an EEG. Those that came back, 20% of them had a near-death experience, talked about leaving their bodies. Every single one of them, same thing. At the point of death, all five brainwave surges. So there's controversy. Is a near-death experience a symptom of a dying brain, or is it more? And the thing is, it is more because there are people who experience things that, for example, studies have been done with people who've been blind since birth who have a near-death experience, and their near-death experience is visual. Now, if it's a side effect of a dying brain, why would it draw upon something that was never in the brain? One of my favorite stories of this, there was a woman who died. Her name is Diane Clark Sharp. And it was a Diane Sharp Clark. Anyway, I got all three names. I just,
Mhm.
and I met her. She died on an operating table, and she said she was hovering above it, and she could see the surgeons and the nurses, and they were working to resuscitate her. And she said she started floating above that, and she saw the light fixture and noticed there was really dusty on the top. And she said, "Well, I better tell the nurse about that because that thing's filthy." And she said, "Wait a second, I'm out of my body." And then, Alex, the next thing she knows, she's hovering over the hospital, and she saw in a rain gutter, she saw a blue sneaker stuck in the rain gutter. Well, then she's resuscitated, and she talks about the sneaker. The surgeon said, "Get two people up on the roof right now." They went up there, and exactly where she said the sneaker was,
Sure.
not just a sneaker, but a blue sneaker. Then there is and there are several cases like that. These are just some examples. In Japan, there was a young woman who was undergoing surgery, and she died during surgery, and she was resuscitated. And when she came out of it, she said, to her parents were there, she said, "It was so strange. I went into this light and my sister was there, but that can't be because she's alive." And her parents burst into tears and said she was killed in a car accident last night. You didn't know.
Um,
So if an NDE is a side effect of a dying brain, how
mhm.
are you encountering people that you didn't even know were dead who were dead? How are you getting veridical, truthful perceptions of these things? And the thing is, in afterlife frequency, I explain, even I go into much more depth with this. So what we're seeing now is that not only does your consciousness, your electromagnetic soul, survive physical death, but it's perfectly capable of communicating with human beings. So I could
In one
keep
way,
going
shape, or
on, but
form.
that's part of it.
When you are given anesthesia, are you in theta?
Yeah, I think that's an artificially induced. Yeah, it's putting you into theta. I think they're trying to actually get you delta, because the last thing you want is
Right.
waking up during surgery.
Right. So delta is the lowest. Okay. So it's
Yeah,
probably it's getting you down to delta. So
right,
because I've interviewed people who've gone into anesthesia and they didn't quote unquote die, but they had a near death experience,
right.
like experience when they were down that low because
Well, your
that's their
consciousness.
window.
Yeah, your consciousness, your EMS will travel around even though your body is still technically alive. I've communicated with people that were in irreversible comas. I've communicated with people that actually were in advanced states of Alzheimer's.
Hmm.
So that also shows that the brain and the EMS are two different things. The brain is a formatting device, and it is a perception device. which, because see, we're living here in the material world and we live in a finite world, and our brain is geared to our five physical senses of sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch. However, once the EMS separates from that, people will return from a near-death experience talking about colors you can't even imagine, sounds you can't even imagine, an entire realm you can't even begin to understand, all of which exceed the five physical senses that our brain is designed to engage in. And I believe that, think of our body as a bottle and the brain is the cork. It's the arbiter between our material world finite existence and the infinity of the collective consciousness that is the afterlife frequency, the other side. For whatever reasons, Alex, we're supposed to have a finite material world existence. And then when we're done with that, the cork is removed and literally the EMS is out of the bottle.
So when you're what happens in from your point of view, from your perspective, what happens immediately after someone passes?
Would it,
When they die, when they die, when someone dies, what happens to the soul? What happens to like what is the process?
okay, and this does not involve a near-death experience. This
No,
is
this is you're going
yeah,
one way
a
ticket, one way
near-death
ticket.
experience is like a rubber band. It's like
Uh,
you're here material world, you're pulling out, and then you touch the afterlife frequency, and then you get pulled back. See, as a medium, the people I deal with, the rubber band is broken.
Correct.
Okay,
It's
and
yeah,
they've
it's a
gone
one way
to the
it's a
other
one way
side.
trip. One way trip.
Think of the EMS. The soul is a drop of water. And when we leave this material body, that drop of water plunges into an eternal sea of consciousness. I call it the afterlife frequency. I also call it the collective consciousness. You're coherent, but now you're interconnected with other souls that are connected to other souls, connected to other souls. You become part of this vast intelligence, infinite intelligence network. You
Mhm.
can move at the speed of light. Why? Because everything in the EM spectrum, electromagnetic spectrum, moves at the speed of light. In fact, in the time it took me just to say that, a soul could be back and forth to the moon about 10 times. That's how fast they
It's
move.
thought. It's the fast of thought.
It's
It's
thought,
faster than
yeah,
light. Yeah.
which is electromagnetic energy. I've asked them, what's it like? Okay. Now, people and a lot of my colleagues, I think with all due respect to them, I think they're 100% wrong when they say, as above, so below. Oh, yes, they drive cars and they're sitting in a cafe drinking coffee. And I hear this all the time, and I'm like, ugh. Because the thing is, they're not drinking coffee at a cafe in Paris or driving a Ferrari. Sorry.
So, fair enough.
But I mean, hey, if you're going to go to heaven and you get a car, I want a Ferrari. All right.
Sure.
So the thing is, what they're doing is creating a point of reference that you and I can understand them. And the first time that I really understood this, I was doing a reading for a woman, and her parents came through, and her mother was in a vineyard in Napa Valley at this beautiful house overlooking rolling hills, and her father was riding a horse in Wyoming and at a campfire. And she said, "That's so funny." I go, "Why?" She goes, "Mom's favorite place in the whole world was Napa Valley, and she hated horseback riding and camping, and that was my father's favorite thing." What they were doing is they're saying, like, look, we're both in quote unquote heaven in the other side, but they were giving us a construct. For her, her father being in heaven was getting to be a cowboy in Wyoming. For her mom, it was sipping great Chardonnay, in Napa Valley. And I've asked spirits, are you in these places? They said no, because you couldn't even begin to understand where we're at. They explained that it's just amazing. And on a number of occasions in my life, they'll let me feel it, and I can only handle it for just a few seconds. And the best way I can describe it, Alex, it's like when you're in a pool or in the ocean and it's that perfect warm temperature, and you go underneath and you're just sort of like floating, and you don't feel your body, you don't feel any pain, you just feel like one with the water. But then I also get the sense that I'm everywhere like everywhere, everything all at once. I mean, I'm not trying to be funny, but it's like I feel interconnected with everything, but I can only handle that for a few seconds. It is so draining. The way I would describe it is I'm a single wire, and all of a sudden, all the electricity from Manhattan is going through me. And so I also want to say, though, by me explaining how wonderful the other side is, there may be listeners out there who are very depressed, that you're
Hmm.
going through some terrible grief and terrible things that maybe you feel nobody else can understand. I am, and Alex is not in any way encouraging anyone to terminate their life because
Of
they think
course.
it'll be better on the other side. There are trained professionals there for you. Don't go through grief. Don't go through depression alone.
Hmm.
Dial 811. That's the National Suicide Hotline. Because the thing is, every day that we're alive is a gift. Many days may not feel that way.
Hmm.
For good or for bad, we've got to get through this until it is our appointed time to leave this world. So I want to make sure, because sometimes people say, well, if it's so good there, why do I want to go on here? Because there's a reason that you're here. Do I know what it is? I don't know if anyone does, but we're all here for specific reasons. So we have to go through the grunge and a lot of times, you go through like the worst time of your life and you think it's all, and then something happens which makes it all worthwhile. Something beautiful happens.
Hmm.
Or maybe you have an influence on somebody in a way that you don't even know, which makes their life more positive. So I just want to make sure that I
Appreciate
do
that.
explain that.
No, I appreciate that. No, I mean, and I wanted to ask you because obviously I've spoken to a lot of people in this space, and I've heard so many different avenues and things that happen on the other side. One thing that they've said to me from multiple sources is that as a soul, if you want to, let's say, learn the cello, let's say, you want to learn the cello, but you don't want to come to Earth and have to learn it here. So you take quote unquote classes on the other side. So when you come here, you're almost like a prodigy because or you've done it multiple times in other lifetimes to build up to become a prodigy in this lifetime. Is that ring true to you?
My EMS theory is also an explanation not just for mediumship, but also near-death experiences, reincarnation, which is what we're talking about here,
Hmm.
deathbed visions, out-of-body experiences. In fact, I'm going to be on tour this year, and I'm speaking at the Edgar Cayce Association's
Hmm.
reincarnation conference. And my talk is Debunking Death, the Science of Reincarnation and Near-Death Experiences. One of the signs of reincarnation is talents that seem to be natural. For example, Mozart was composing works of music by the time he was 4.
Hmm.
Okay, how many 4-year-olds start composing things
Right.
like that? You hear about all these child prodigies, and it is believed that they're carrying over talents from a prior lifetime. Also, phobias, people that are terrified of the water, it's believed maybe they drowned in a prior life. I have several cases of reincarnation, which have been documented. And in fact, if we could, sometimes I'd like to come back and maybe just do a show on reincarnation,
Hmm. Sure.
because there's so many fascinating stories. And that's the other thing in communicating with spirits, because people ask, is there a heaven and a hell? And they said, well, essentially the afterlife frequency is a heaven. There's like different frequencies to it. For example, Mother Teresa's on a much different frequency than Osama bin Laden would be on.
Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
And chances are he's going to have to come back. And it's like, I can only imagine what he's going to come back as. All right.
Right.
And this time,
Exactly.
I don't think it's going to be a multimillionaire who wreaks death and destruction upon people. He may be on the receiving end of that. So you've always got to be nice. And that's why all the great spiritual teachers tell us this. But as far as hell goes, the archetypal hell of a guy with a pitchfork sticking in the butt for all of eternity does not exist, but reincarnation does. There are people right now on this planet who are in hell. Think about people you know who are coping with cancer? What about a parent who's lost a child? What
Mhm.
about the people of Ukraine, of Gaza, Israel, Somalia? I mean, you go all over the world, there are people in this country, people who are homeless and suffering. Hell exists in many forms. Okay. But as far as this eternal damnation, and in the afterlife frequency, I give the history of hell, how it came about, and how, yes, it's a myth, a metaphor, and unfortunately very real, at least here on Earth.
Which makes all the sense in the world. What are some of the misconceptions of psychic mediums that are out there that you'd like to kind of debunk?
Well, number one, that we're all knowing and all seeing. Oh, you should have seen that coming. Well, you can't read for yourself. You can't read for yourself. I mean, I wish I could. I'd be like, Powerball, Powerball, you know. And the thing is, people always say, well, if you're so psychic, why don't they give you winning lottery numbers? Well, they may give me six winning lottery numbers, but did they tell me when those numbers are coming out? I mean, seriously, they may give me six winning numbers, but they're not telling me that they're going to come out 15 years, 11 days, and 2 hours from now. All right. So people need to understand that too. The other misconception is that we can just conjure up any spirit that we want. And I always it cracks me up when I like a celebrity dies and they'll interview the media will interview someone. Oh, did that person come to you in the medium's like, oh yes, they did. And it's like, well, unless there is a connection in other words, I have to have a connection if to a person that had a material world connection to the person in spirit. That's why, I just can't summon Sir Isaac Newton, that type of thing.
Okay.
Um, one of I'm laughing because I was doing a reading for this woman once, and she reminded me of, remember that show Gilligan's Island?
Of course.
Uh, remember Lovey,
Yeah.
Thurston Halliburton's wife,
Thirds.
Lovey, the rich lady with, she was elegant and she talked like Lovey. I mean, she was just like a really sweet, but I could tell she was very affluent. And so I'm doing the reading for her, and her father comes through, and I'm describing him, and he kind of looked like the actor Clark Gable. He was like dashing, debonair, the mustache, tuxedo. And she goes, oh yes, father was very dashing and debonair, and he loved dressing up in a tuxedo. And then I paused, and she goes, why are you pausing? I go, this is going to sound really weird, but I could swear to God President Ronald Reagan is standing right next to him. And she goes, oh, daddy used to play golf with Ronnie all the time. And I'm like, what? Okay. And then I realized that her father was this affluent billionaire who owned a golf course in California. And then I said, this is even weirder. I'm seeing King Edward VIII and Wallace Simpson. And she goes, oh, them. And I go, what? She goes, they used to crash our parties all the time. Because he used to be a king of England, he thought everyone should pick up the tab for him. And she goes, and she was such a shameless social climber. And I'm sitting there like, oh my God, I mean, I'm trying to absorb that I'm talking to her father, the famous billionaire Ronald Reagan, the former king of England, and Wallace Simpson. And the thing is, though, she knew them all.
Sure.
And
And there's a
I didn't
connection.
know this, and I could go on and on because I've done readings
Yeah.
for a lot of very, famous people. But I always got a big kick out of that one because, I was just doing a reading and it didn't dawn on me until Ronald Reagan came through. But if she'd just been a regular, I don't want to say regular person, but someone who is not affiliated with them, it is pretty much like 99.9% unlikely that
Mhm.
President Reagan,
So,
King Edward and Wallace would come through.
so let me ask you, if I would have met President Reagan at one point in my life, physically, would that be enough?
Possibly, possibly. Like I was doing a gallery reading one time. This lady stands up, and all of a sudden I go, I'm seeing David Bowie. And she goes, oh, I met him once.
And that and
So,
David Bowie decided to show up. The other
yeah.
thing that's interesting about spirit, and this is something I've learned over the course of my work on this show, is that spirit can be multiple places at multiple times.
Correct.
So I always say Jesus is the hardest working man in show business because he's always at everyone's near death experience.
Correct.
He's always so it's not like there's just one David Bowie and he happens to be there and he's nowhere else in the universe other than next to you right there. No, that's
That's
an essence of him,
Well,
essentially.
that's another aspect of the EMS, the electromagnetic soul, is multidimensionalism, and that also comes in with string theory, that there's more than one dimension. And also,
Mm-hmm.
you got to realize these entities, these spirits, are capable of moving at the speed of light, and they are multidimensional, which also means that our soul, our EMS, also has a multidimensional component to it. We think that the EMS is just encased in our brain. However, it's electromagnetic energy and it's patched into the afterlife frequency. So, one of the most asked questions is, what if I want to communicate with somebody who's reincarnated? Is that possible? Okay, think of your higher self, the multidimensional aspect of your EMS, as being a librarian. And the librarian has read the books War and Peace, The Godfather,
Harry
Diary of
Potter.
Anne Frank, Harry Potter. Okay. And you want to talk to Anne Frank, but she's reincarnated as Michael Corleone from The Godfather. Okay. The thing is, even though those characters don't recognize or know each other, the higher self does. And
Right.
so let's say that, yes, Anne Frank is now Michael Corleone, and I'm just using that because, those are
Sure,
recognizable
sure, sure, sure,
characters.
sure.
You can still communicate with Anne Frank because the higher self, multidimensional aspect of the electromagnetic soul retains the memories and personality traits of the individual incarnations.
As far as one of the other questions I get asked a lot, Mark, is about ghosts, bad spirits, negative energies, things like that. We've been talking of everything that we've been talking about is very positive,
Yeah.
ghosts. Is there, quote unquote, bad spirits, quote unquote, ghost, entities on the other side that want, or spirits on the other side that want to cause harm? And if there is, how do you protect yourself and how do you protect yourself dealing with that?
Well, I've been on a lot of paranormal investigations, and there's three schools of thought on ghosts. First off, I don't believe in devils, demons, or hell. So I'm not into the whole evil spirit thing. And I've done over 15,000 readings, and I've yet to have a boogeyman show up in any one of them.
Fair
Okay.
enough. Fair enough.
Ghosts, some people think that they're trapped here. It's a spirit trapped in this world. Nonsense. As soon as you die, you are an EMS free to the body. You know exactly that you're a spirit. And look, why would you want to be trapped here? Why would you want to hang out in a garbage dump when you can be, on the beaches of Maui or Tahiti?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and that's what. Secondly, is that certain spirits visit particular places all the time. So they're not trapped here, they come back. Usually that involves things that involve trauma, murders. Third, which I really think is the answer, is that matter retains vibration. And in areas where something particularly horrible happens, like when I was a teenager and I was in college and I was in Europe and I visited Dachau concentration camp
Ooh.
and suddenly found myself surrounded by all these spirits wearing the black and white prison garb, shrieking. Okay. The thing is, they were no more sentient spirits than your reflection in a mirror is you. What you're picking up on is the residual energy echo of the violence, the murder, and the cruelty that happened there. And a lot of times people go in and they do house clearings because it's like an unending echo. And the idea of the clearing or the exorcism is to deflect that energy away. Then this is the fourth category, is elementals. Elementals are non-human spiritual intelligence that are more aligned with nature, with plants, with the earth, and they're not evil. It's just that they're not necessarily concerned with humans. We know them by many names: sprites, pixies, fairies, um, leprechauns in Hawaii, the Metahune, in Japan, the Shinto religion, the Kami, Kami, they appear in many different beliefs. I've encountered several of them throughout my life, and they just assume don't have much to do with us because they have different focus. And a lot of times people encounter them, and when you encounter a spirit, it's normal to get cold chills and tingles through your body. Why? Their electromagnetic energy, their EM field is interfacing with your body's EM field. The physiological response is cold chills and tingles, which is also the same physiological response when we're afraid, fight, fright, or flight. So we immediately assume it's evil. Because I go to places, oh, I get cold chills. It's like, calm down, everybody. And then the spirit starts communicating with me, and it's like, okay, they're not, they're not evil. So I take a more objective approach when I'm engaging in paranormal investigations. I like to apply the scientific method of objective observation, collect the data, and then analyze it, as opposed to jumping to a conclusion. I mean, so many of these shows, they shake night vision goggles around and scream demon, and everybody's running. And I've been on a couple of those shows, and I'm telling them that it's more like certain parts of the earth. There's we have magnetic field on the planet. Some areas have positive charges, other areas have negative charges. When you're in an area where there's a lot of negative natural energy, it's very easy to feel that the experience and the encounters are negative.
Right, exactly. Let me ask you this. Do you ever do predictions about humanity as a general statement? Do you ever kind of do like, hey, you know, well, before I answer that question, another question popped into my head. When I was at 9/11, I was actually at the World Trade Center.
Yeah, I've
I
been there
walked,
too. Yeah.
right. And when you walk, I literally walked from the street the second I stepped foot onto the World Trade Center area near the fountains. This wave of just heavy energy
Yeah.
just dropped on top of me. And I felt it like the rest of the time when I went into the museum and all this stuff. It was just palatable in the air. You could feel this energy there. There wasn't ghosts or demons or spirits or anything like that. It was just a very heavy energy. And there are places like that that I've walked into throughout the world that
Yeah.
you just walk in and you just go, oh, something just happened here. It's similar to like, your mother and dad, your father and mother are having a fight. And then the second you walk in, they're quiet, but you feel what just went down.
Yeah.
You're like,
Yeah.
I'm not supposed to be here. So is that something similar to what you were talking about?
That's exactly what I'm talking about. And see, everyone is capable of feeling that. That's a residual energy echo. And there was over 3,000 people killed there that day, and plus so many others wounded. You're picking up on that. Yeah, when I went to Ground Zero, unlike when I was a hungover college student at
Right.
Dachau,
Yeah.
because we'd been at the Hofbräu House the night before and pounding beers, and then we got there and it was like, whoa. I knew when I was at Ground Zero, but I can only handle it for about 45 minutes, and I just
Mhm.
said, I have to leave. Okay.
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I'm good.
I felt the same. I felt the same way. And the same thing happens is like when you land in Maui, the energy in that whole place, you could just feel the energy is slower, more relaxed, chilled, as opposed to when you walk out of the subway in Manhattan.
Yeah.
Like it's
Yeah,
completely different energy.
it's frenetic versus the Jimmy Buffett vibe. Okay.
Yes, exactly. But it's something that's palatable. You could really feel
Yeah.
these energies out there. Now, do you do any sort of predictions or kind of readings of humanity as a whole? What's going to happen in the next 5 or 10 years? In big broad
Spirits,
strokes.
occasionally spirits will transmit things to me that are commentary on what's going on. And what they've told me is the next decade's going to be very, very difficult for humanity. And I don't think it takes a psychic for us to figure that out. I mean, we're on the precipice of the Third World War, but they're also telling me that that's not going to happen. but it's like we're walking on a tightrope over, between two buildings. We're on that precipice. And they're also telling me that a lot of the negativity, the racism, the anger needed to come to the surface. It all had to boil up to the surface so that we can be aware of it. So we're going through a very painful period of growth. And we grow in response to adversity. The last time I had something like this, it was in 2019. I was doing readings for a number of people, and one client in particular, her spirits kept showing up wearing surgical masks, and they kept saying March 2020, March 2020. So I was like, well, are you scheduled for surgery, or is anybody in the medical field? And they said no. And I noticed like in three or four, actually more, it was like about a dozen different readings, this kept coming up. And so I didn't know what it meant. They didn't know what it meant. So then March 2020 rolls around. I start getting emails right and left saying, oh my God, we're all wearing surgical masks now. All my spirits said. And that's when, the country went into lockdown and we all had to be, wearing masks. So they were very aware of that. And they were telling us to take this very, very seriously. Okay. But now what they've told me is this next decade is precarious. Precarious. Now, once again, it doesn't require a psychic to tell us that. People need to be aware. People need to be aware. Um, I find it particularly disturbing, and I always avoid politics, okay,
Hmm.
because everybody has a right to believe what they want to believe. But I was just hoping by the 21st century, humans would have had enough of warfare, and apparently we haven't. And
Hmm.
once again, we don't need a hell with the devil running around sticking us with the pitchfork. Humans are doing a very good job of creating it on their own.
Very, very well put. Very well put. From your perspective, what is the most important thing that individuals need to understand about life after death?
That God exists, heaven exists, our souls are immortal living spirits, that we as humans can communicate with souls, and that we'll all be reunited with our loved ones when it is our appointed time to leave the material world.
When you say appointed time, is that going in accordance with the soul blueprint or the soul plan? Is that something that you've been exposed to?
It, it appears to. Um, from all the spirits I've worked with, they always tell me there's a day we're coming in, a day we're going out. And what we have choice over is what we do with the time in between. And I've had a number of friends in the medical profession, and they said nothing is more horrible than when you see somebody who tried to die by suicide, yet they botched it up and now they're paralyzed or so severely brain damaged. So they're going to still live until they were supposed to die. It's just that they had a choice not to do that. Okay, they had a choice to seek out help and counseling and comfort, but instead now they have to live out the remainder of that time in a very terrible state. And I'm not passing judgment on anybody. I mean,
Sure.
this is what I've seen, and it's really heart-wrenching.
Yeah, it's very interesting because I've heard so many people talk about the soul blueprint, and to my understanding, it's like there's markers in life that are put in front of you, and those markers are kind of part of what you designed to learn in this life. Now, how you get from marker A to marker B, from marker B to marker C, that's your choice. But
That's your
that's
choice.
like you're gonna meet, Jane, and you're probably gonna marry Jane. You could go another way, but more likely Jane has lessons to teach you. You're gonna
And,
become
and then
a
when yeah, and then when it's over, it's like, well, hopefully that karma's done.
yeah, because in other words, so you chose when you were on the other side, you're like, I want to go into a place where there's I want to be a psychic medium, but you know what? I want to shake shit up a little bit. I'm going to be an attorney as well. And so I'm going to be an attorney, psychic medium. That's not really. I think I can learn a lot from there, and then and all this and all the lessons that you've learned, and that's kind of the choice you've kind of put down. And apparently, I wanted to be a podcaster, so which is
Well,
interesting.
you have a message. You have a message, and a big part of your role in life is to be a healer through education. And the way that you heal is psychologically by bringing to the forefront these different topics. Because, I mean, 30 years ago, what we're discussing now would have been very fringe element, very freaky, scoffed at as blasphemous, sacrilegious, and all of that. And now it's beginning to be discussed openly and scientifically. This isn't hocus pocus. I mean, people say, "Oh, how can you do what you do?" And it's like, well, why would I leave a very lucrative practice as an attorney to do this? And it's because that was the point in my life where I needed to transition, take the skills, the transferable skills of speaking and writing and working with people, and then transfer them into my work as a medium, an author, a lecturer, paranormal investigator. And that's the beauty of life. When people say, well, don't you know everything? Well, do you really want to know everything? It's
Okay,
kind of
no.
nice knowing that a large part of the future is a mystery and it's an adventure. I mean, that's what makes humans explore. And I'm called the psychic explorer. I'm known as the psychic lawyer and the psychic explorer because I examine ancient mysteries. I go to mystical sites around the world. I've been to Machu Picchu and Mayan ruins in Central America and places throughout Europe and Asia, examining these places and certainly the US Native American sites that are still mystifying us. How did they do this? How did they build these things? What does this language mean? To me, it's fascinating to study these things. Why do human beings want to explore space? I'm a big proponent of our space program. Technology breeds technology. The more we learn, the science we gain can benefit us here on Earth. The one thing that came through during COVID, and I was meditating, and all of a sudden I got this massive message, and it said that we were given, we, meaning humanity, was given a glimpse of what we could do if we worked together. And then it dawned on me, while the whole country and the whole world was in lockdown, all the world's scientists, okay, medical researchers, biologists, chemists, what were they doing? They're all working on a treatment for COVID, trying to figure it out. Okay, we knew it was a coronavirus, but we didn't know how to treat it, and they were working together, sharing information and knowledge. Meanwhile, for the first time in 400 years, dolphins were spotted in the
In
canals of
Venice.
Venice.
Yes.
Mumbai and Beijing, people could actually see the skyline because the air pollution went away. And what the collective consciousness, the afterlife frequency told me is that if your brain trust, we, meaning the collective consciousness, we, meaning, I guess, God, we gave you all of these intelligent people. And if they were working together, you could solve all your problems. And then it was all over because then humans went right back to our same egocentric, Putin had to go invade Ukraine and blah, 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 blah. And here we are. And the thing is, think about it. If we stop trying to conquer each other, create empires, and subject people to domination, if we stop the greed and the ego driven behaviors and got all of our scientists working on clean energy sources,
Mhm.
clearing up diseases, food production, air quality, water quality, we can do it. We have it. So when you're asking what messages have they given us, that's what they gave us. And they gave us COVID so that we got a glimpse of that. And I know I'll probably catch some flack. Oh, they gave us COVID. Look, it's a horrible thing. I had it. It's terrible. I've lost family members to it. Okay, I don't look at it as a gift, but it was something which got the whole world for a few weeks on the same page and how quickly nature responded in a positive way. So
Mhm.
that's what I see. In the next 10 years, well, here we are again. Okay. Great powers clashing, proxy wars going on, countries that and people that have no business having nuclear technology trying to get it. Why? Because power. And I think the late great rock star Jimi Hendrix said it best. When the power of love overcomes the love of power, we will finally have peace.
Mm, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful quote. Now, Mark, I'm going to ask you a few questions to ask all my guests. What is your definition of living a fulfilled life?
When you wake up in the morning and the first thing you think of is that you're happy and you're looking forward to the day, as opposed to waking up and going, ugh, I gotta go to work.
If you had a chance to go back in time and talk to little Mark, what advice would you give him?
Buy Amazon stock.
Apple too. Buy some Apple. Buy some Apple. Buy
Apple,
Tesla.
Amazon.
Just keep it. You'll be fine. You'll be fine. Just those two alone, you should be okay. How do you define God or source energy?
Well, I think that's what I've been talking about through the entire interview. God is the energy that flows through us, with us, connects everything. When I was talking about the quantum energy on a subatomic level, I think the best way to define God is how Nikola Tesla did, what some people call God, others call the laws of physics.
What is love?
Love is energy. Energy never dies. Energy is neither created nor destroyed, only transferred from one form to another. Love is the reason for life. We grieve as deeply as we have loved. Love is is the is what makes life worth living. And grief, unfortunately, is the price of love, but a life without love isn't much of a life at all.
And what is the ultimate purpose of life?
Make each day count. And when I say make each day count, certainly do something for yourself, but do something for somebody else, something positive. We're only given a little bit of time, whether you live 19 years or 90 years. Each day matters, each day counts. And do something that improves your quality of life and also that of those around you. And realize that we are not the center of the universe, that we are part of a collective, that we're all brothers and sisters. We're all energetically interconnected. That's what I think.
And Mark, where can people find out more about you and the work that you're doing in the world?
Please visit my website, which is afterlifefrequency.com. Just like my latest book, Afterlife Frequency, I invite everyone to sign up for my newsletter. I have a live stream show, Alex, every Thursday, 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific, called The Psychic and the Doc. And my co-host is Dr. Pat Baccili, world-renowned behavioral psychologist. We have a lot of great topics, a lot of great guests. People call in. I'll do a mini reading, and Dr. Pat uses her intuitive insights to help people understand. It's been a very healing show, and we just won Best Holistic Life's Radio Show of the Year award. So
nice.
I'm very honored for that. Yeah.
Congrats. And do you have any parting messages for the audience?
I think that the simplest message, and it sounds simple, but it's a lot harder to do, is treat other people the way you want to be treated. It's the golden rule. Jesus said it, Buddha said it, they all say it. Treat people the way you want to be treated.
Mark, I appreciate you and thank you so much for this amazing conversation. We'll definitely have you back in the future, especially to talk about some ancient civilizations, because that's one of my favorite topics as well. So I appreciate you, my friend. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex.
Thanks for watching. Click on one of the videos below to continue your journey, and don't forget to subscribe.